Welcome to our third and final lecture covering Chapter 3 of our textbook. Today we're going to discuss the topic of agency. But before we begin, let's do a little bit of a refresher as to what we've covered so far in the first two lectures relating to Chapter 3. There's really three main topics for this particular chapter, and of course the overall chapter title is Hospitality Business Structures. We first of all talked about organizational structures. These are legal entities that we create in order to do business. It can be a sole proprietorship, it could be a partnership, and again we talked about three different types of partnership. General partnership, limited partnership, and limited liability partnership. We talked about limited liability companies, and then we talked about two types of corporations, the C corporation and the S corporation. So after we finished talking about organizational structures in our first lecture, then we went on to our second topic, which is operational structures. And we talked about 5 different operational structures: the owner-operator structure, the franchise structure, the structure in which you have a management company run the business, and that management company is separate from the owners. And we talked about REITs, which have to do with real estate property, which is kind of similar to a limited partnership. And then we talked about condominium setup, wherein the owners either hire a management company to run the condominium, or sometimes the owners actually run it themselves. And we talked about the topic of, here, let me go forward, fractional interest. This would be kind of like a timeshare, a fractional ownership, timeshare idea. So now we're ready for our last topic for this chapter, and that is the idea of agency. Agency is a really important concept in the law, and it's something that we probably have some familiarity with even if we don't have any direct connections to the law. We've all heard about real estate agents, or we've heard about, maybe secret agents, and those terms reflect the idea that we're going to be talking about when we're talking about agency. A real estate agent, imagine that I have a piece of real estate and Bob wants to buy it from me. I've put it on the market and I have hired Sarah to be my real estate agent. Bob hires Lewis to be his real estate agent. Well, Bob isn't going to talk directly to me, the owner of the real estate. Probably. I mean, they're not saying that we can't have a conversation, but generally speaking, Bob is going to convey his offers and his responses to my offers through his agent, through Lewis. And Lewis won't talk directly to me, but Lewis will talk to Sarah, my agent. So it'll be me talking to my agent talking to Bob's agent's talking to Bob. There isn't the direct communication. When Bob's agent, Lewis, talks to my agent, Sarah, it's as if Bob himself was speaking. And when my agent, Sarah, talks to Bob's agent, Lewis, it's as if I am speaking. The agent has my authority and Bob's authority to enter into agreements. What the agent says is just as if I had said it. That's the legal implications of that. So why do we have these agency relationships? Well, there's lots of reasons and lots of different circumstances that it becomes relevant. But one of the realities about the legal entities that we've talked about, with the exception of the first two entities, let me just go back and we can look at the list of legal entities that we have here. Here we go. With the exception of sole proprietorship and general partnership, all of our other entities, there is some separation between the owners and the entity. There's even some separation with the general partnership. And so how does a corporation do anything? I mean, it's just a legal fiction. It's a piece of paper. It's an idea. So if a corporation wants to buy land, how would it buy land? It doesn't have a hand. It can't sign a contract. It doesn't have a voice. It can't negotiate. It requires people to do those tasks: officers, directors, agents, employees, those types of things. It requires human beings in order to make decisions. It needs people with brains, in other words, and people who have the ability to make decisions and implement actions. And so you can see for most of these entities, really with the exception of the first entity, sole proprietorship, and possibly the second entity, general partnership, all of these are going to require some type of agency relationship to do anything. And of course, these entities have no reason to exist unless they can do something. So the whole system of business organizations is dependent upon the idea of agency. Businesses use humans in order to do tasks, in order to accomplish goals. And we're going to discuss 3 of the big ways that we accomplish this agency. These aren't the only ways, or I guess you could say they're the only ways, but we're not going to talk about all the different examples of these different ways. Probably the most common, the most readily recognizable to us is the master-servant relationship. Whenever I use this term or think about this term, it sounds very old-fashioned to me. It almost sounds like we're in, medieval England, and we have some, duke who has his pinky in the air, and he has some, housemaid or butler or somebody, dusting the furniture. I don't know, whatever they might be doing back in medieval times. Anyway, when I hear the terms master and servant, that's what I think about. It's really not the terms that we typically use. Let's say that I worked at Fuddruckers as a waiter or as a cook. I wouldn't consider myself a servant of Fuddruckers. That sounds very almost demeaning and very old-fashioned. I would consider myself most likely an employee. Yes, I might be receiving wages from Fuddruckers, but I wouldn't really feel subservient to the entity. I mean, I have the choice whether I come to work or not, and I'm only going to continue to come to work as long as I find it advantageous. So the whole idea of master-servant suggests a level of control and a level of hierarchy that is a little distasteful to us today. I'm going to ask that you put aside those feelings and just realize that the term master-servant is just a historical term that we use for the employee relationship. Master-servant in the law means the same thing as employer-employee. And so when I hire Bob to be my employee, he might be highly skilled, he might be, a brain surgeon or a physicist or some other highly skilled, highly compensated person. But the law would say that because I hired him, I'm the master and he's the servant. But again, more commonly, we would say I'm the employer, he's the employee. So when you have this relationship, the employee is going to act for the benefit of the employer. The servant is going to act for the benefit of the master. The idea is that the master controls how the servant performs the job. So let's say that I hire Bob maybe he's an architect. I hire him as my employee and I tell him to design this building. And I give him specifications. This is how many floors, this is how many square footage, these are the materials I want you to build it in, these are the features I want the building to have, this is the budget that you have. If he starts veering away from those parameters, if he puts more floors on the building or fewer floors on the building or starts spending more money or does other things that are not what I want him to do, then I'm going to fire him. Or I'm going to, I might give him a chance to improve, but I ultimately control what he does. It's my job to make sure that my servant, in this case Bob, does what I want him to do. And if I don't, well, it's kind of bad on me. I mean, I had the ability to control Bob and I chose not to, so therefore if Bob does something foolish or silly, I'm going to be responsible for this. Let me give you an example how this might play out. Imagine that Bob is my employee, and this time I am Target. I'm the department store, or I guess maybe not department store, but anyway, we all know what Target is. So I hire Bob to be a cashier, and Bob is trained, and he's starting his job as a cashier. And you know what? He's great at it. He's got a friendly demeanor. He's very efficient, quick moving, and also very accurate. And so the customers love him. The lines move quickly, and his supervisor sees that he's doing a really, really good job. In fact, he becomes so popular with some customers that some customers actually seek out his line at Target so that they can check out with him. And because he's so efficient, it just seems like that there needs to be less staffing of the cashier area as a result of this. So Target is seeing a reduction in salary costs. This is resulting in increased customer visits to Target and also reduced salary costs. So it's a win-win for Target. Target gets to take in all those benefits. I mean, Target may decide to give Bob a promotion or a pay increase because he's such a valuable member of the team. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but whatever it does with respect to Bob's income, it's seeing a financial advantage from having Bob around, right? We'd all say that Bob's presence there is a good thing for the employer in this situation. And sometimes the employer does make a good choice. Maybe it's luck, maybe it's skill, but for whatever reason, Bob has worked out really well. So we're going to fast forward 6 months ahead, and Bob's had some bumps along the way. He's encountered some difficulties, and you know what? Maybe his wife has left him, and he's encountered some health problems. And Bob has started maybe drinking more than he ought to. Maybe he's started experiencing a depression and having several issues in his life. And so he went from this kind of model employee to kind of not so great employee. Anyway, one day Sally is checking out, and so Sally puts all of her items on the conveyor belt, and so Bob starts wanding the items and putting in the bag, and Sally says to Bob mid transactions, goes, "Oh, Bob, or oh, cashier, I have some coupons." Well, Bob doesn't really like dealing with coupons. They're a hassle. He's got to punch in different numbers. He just doesn't want to deal with coupons today. So what does he do? He turns around, faces Sally, and punches her in the nose. No warning. She falls like a rock to the ground. The other people in line are shocked. They call security. Sally receives medical treatment. Of course, the manager immediately fires Bob. Bob is escorted out of the facility. He will never work at Target again. Sally has some significant damage. One of her teeth was broken. She has a concussion. She's going to have to miss work. She's got a black eye. She has some significant pain and suffering and problems as a result of this punch. And so she can sue Bob, certainly, but keep in mind, hey, Bob is a cashier at Target. He never had a ton of money, and now he's an unemployed cashier at Target, which means he has even less money. So while Sally can certainly sue Bob, it's probably not going to be a path to great riches for Sally. So in addition to suing Bob, Sally also thinks to herself, or more likely her attorney says to her, "Hey, Sally, we can sue Bob for sure, but why don't we also sue Target?" Well, Sally thinks about it, and her first thought is, gosh, well, I mean, Target didn't want Bob to punch me. In fact, gosh, the manager and the security officer, they were all so nice to me. They were all shocked by what had happened. And in fact, the manager told me as I was being taken away in the ambulance, how Target has special training to make sure that all of its employees know not to get involved in physical violence. So Sally feels confident that Target did not want Bob to punch her. And, honestly, the attorney agrees, but the attorney says we can still sue Target because just like when Bob was doing a great job at Target, being the agent, being the servant, being the employee of Target, Target gets to reap all of the benefits of Bob's good work. When Bob makes a bad choice, even when it's one that the employer would not have agreed with, the employer is still, in many cases, going to be responsible for that choice, even if Bob violated a company policy. Now, this doesn't mean that when Bob is, let's say Bob on the way home from work is in a car accident. Well, obviously, it has nothing to do with his employment at Target because, Bob has a right to drive around town, and Target certainly didn't tell him to drive on a certain road. But when Bob is checking people out at the Target cash register, well, yes, Target has given Bob the authority to do that. Target has the ability to control how Bob completes that function. So we would say that the master-servant relationship puts Bob the servant in an agency relationship with respect to customers. And so if Bob does a great job, Target gets all the goodies from that. And if Bob does an awful job, Target's going to be responsible for that too. Of course, Bob is also going to be responsible. It's not like Bob gets a free pass. He can be sued, and he certainly would be sued if he were to punch Sally in the nose. So that's the master-servant aspect of the agency relationship. There's a special name for this, and this is a Latin term, responde et superior. And that literally means, let him, meaning the superior or the higher up, respond to that matter. And so literally that's what it means in Latin. And the idea is that this expression means that the master or the employer is responsible for the acts of the employee if the employee was acting within the course and scope of his employment. So you do need to know this term. We don't do a lot of Latin in this course, but this is a very common and important Latin term relating to the agency idea within an employment relationship. So we have now completed the master-servant relationship. We're now going to go to the agent-principal relationship. And this is really just a larger category. Let me let's go ahead here. If we think about it as a continuum, the agent-principal relationship involves the universe, say, that's this big. And the master-servant part of this universe is over here. So this is kind of a special category of this larger category of situations. So it's really not that, I mean, a servant really is an agent, and the master really is the principal. Actually, we've kind of reversed these terms here. But not all agents are servants, and not all principals are masters. But a master is going to be a principal, and a servant is going to be an agent. So this is a subcategory. Master servant is a subcategory of this larger category, agent principal. Okay, so what is a principal? The principal it can be the employer or somebody else. It doesn't have to be the employer. This is the person who is directing the actions of the agents to perform the business. Going back to my example of the real estate agent. When I hire somebody to be my real estate agent, they're not my employee. They may be doing several different real estate transactions and have lots of different customers. But when they're performing tasks for me, then they are going to be my agent, even though they're not my employee. And when they make decisions, make statements to the other side, then those actions are going to bind me. And so in that situation, I, who am selling my land, or maybe Bob, who's buying my land, is the principal, and then the agent would be the person whom I have selected, whom I have hired for this task. Might be an employee, or we might have a more distant relationship. But the important thing is, just like with the master-servant situation, is that the principal is liable for the acts of his or her agents, because the principal can control those acts. Or at least has the ability to control those acts. And again, what is the agent? Well, this is a person authorized to act for or to represent another. And when we say another, what do we mean? We mean the principal. And it can be the business, or it can be the individual human being. And so that's what an agent is. Let's consider the term fiduciary responsibility. And of course, this is a common word that we see in the law of fiduciary. A fiduciary is somebody who has a special role of trust in a relationship. Agents have that kind of relationship. When a principal selects an agent to perform in an agency relationship, the principal is really trusting that agent, because keep in mind, if the agent if Bob's real estate agent, for example, accepts a transactional price that Bob doesn't agree to, Bob is still stuck with it. I mean, Bob can always sue the real estate agent, but if Bob has given that authority to that real estate agent, and the real estate agent conveys the wrong answer, then with respect to whomever Lewis, the real estate agent, has communicated that information, Bob is stuck with that. And so it is a position of a great deal of trust and responsibility. And the agent, because of this level of trust, must always act in the best interest of the principal. The agent isn't acting selfishly isn't acting for his or her own benefit, but for the benefit of the principal. Let's imagine, going back to our real estate example, let's imagine that Lewis, Bob's real estate agent, really needs a commission. And if this sale goes through, he's going to get 3%. Bob really wants to buy the house for $300,000. If it sells for $300,000, then Lewis is expecting to get $9,000. Pretty nice amount of change. But it doesn't look like it's going to sell it at $300,000. It looks like, most likely, in order to get a deal closed, it's going to need to be maybe $310,000. But Lewis is pretty sure that Bob is not going to be willing to pay that much money. And Lewis is also pretty sure, given how the negotiations going forward, that I will be unwilling to sell the property for less than $310,000. So you can see in the situation, it looks like there's not going to be a deal made. What Lewis, the agent, should do is put aside his own interest, his desire to have a commission, and focus exclusively on what his client, what his principal wants, what Bob wants. Bob doesn't want to close a deal unless it's for $300,000 or less. But if Lewis is tempted and says, well, you know, why don't I just go ahead and accept it at $310,000? I'm pretty sure that Groover will accept that, and now I'm going to be able to get the commission. Well, of course, Lewis isn't really going to do this, because hopefully Lewis is a more ethical person. But even if he were to do this, yes, he can accept that and then bind Bob. But what is Bob going to turn around and do? Sue Lewis. So, Lewis isn't going to be able to come out well in this transaction, simply because he has breached his fiduciary responsibility, and that means that the principal can sue the agent for that breach. The fiduciary duty is actually a bundle of several different duties. One is the duty of utmost care. So Lewis has a duty to be really, really careful with Bob's stuff. He ought to read over the documents very, very carefully to make sure there are no typos, to make sure there are no errors. Also, the agent has a duty of integrity, of being not engaged in self-dealing, not engaged in anything that is bordering on dishonesty or covertness or anything like that. He also has a duty of loyalty. He has to put the interests of Bob ahead of his own interests, and frankly ahead of anybody else. And he has the duty of good faith. He has to act above reproach in the transaction. So these are, in some sense, just a different way of conveying the same idea, but each one of these terms has a slightly different shade of meaning. And so being an agent's a pretty big deal. As we said before, an employee oftentimes is an agent. Now, let's go back to our example with Bob, the cashier at Target. So let's say that Bob is a cashier at Target. Bob was, but let's say that we'll say that the loading dock, or let's say that Target had a new program wherein Target would load up people's cars. You know, if you were buying a big item, there would be kind of this loading dock where you'd have some Target employees who would actually take the large items and put it in the car of the customer. And so the cashier area is a little bit slow, so the supervisor calls Bob away from this area and puts him back in this area, in the loading dock area. And so but Bob is kind of a scrawny guy, not real strong. And so he's seeing this big item, looks really, really heavy, and he's expected to help move it. And he says, hey, you know what, I'm a cashier. I know how to scan things and make change. I don't know how to lift this heavy item. I don't know how to do it safely, and I'm not very strong. I don't think I can do it anyway. And so in that situation, Bob isn't really going to be an effective agent for Target because he lacks the skills, he lacks the know-how, he lacks the experience to safely and effectively put the item into the customer's car. He is not the right person for that. And the reality is, in the professional world, people do specialize. You don't really want your accountant to be performing brain surgery, and you don't want your brain surgeon to be filing the income tax returns. We have specialization, and so a person might be a servant and a fiduciary in a certain role, but not in every single role. So now we've talked about the master-servant relationship, and we've talked about the agent-principal relationship. Let's talk about one more category, which is the independent contractor. This is a really, really complex subject, and I'm not even going to claim to begin talking about it. The differences between an independent contractor and an employee are very subtle. The dividing line between who's an employee and who's an independent contractor is a analysis that is very subtle, that is very fact specific, and that reasonable people can differ significantly on. Generally speaking, the federal government wants as many people as possible to be employees. Why do they want that? Well, the primary reason is that they get to collect taxes a lot easier if somebody is an employee versus an independent contractor. Employers, in theory, would like most workers to be independent contractors because that's a cheaper way to employ people. But as a practical matter, most employers don't really like to use a lot of independent contractors. I don't say many employers don't like to use a lot of independent contractors because the IRS can penalize employers who mischaracterize or misclassify workers who should have been classified as employees as independent contractors. And so there's a risk of pretty significant fines and fees associated with the misclassification. Yes, if the person could have been classified appropriately as an independent contractor, that's a better tax situation for the employer. But the risk of misclassification is so significant and can be so financially expensive that many times employers err on the side of designating more people as employees than maybe they absolutely have to. There really is no risk associated with designating someone as an employee who isn't an employee, except, of course, there can be some greater tax burden. So what is an independent contractor? It's a person or an entity, so it doesn't have to be a human being. It could be a general partnership. It could be an LLC. It could be a corporation. Anyway, whatever the entity is that contracts with another to perform a particular task, but whose work is not directed or controlled by the hiring party. The more the employer is able to control how the work is accomplished, the more it looks like an employee-employer relationship and not an independent contractor relationship. Let's go back and consider Bob's situation. Bob, our cashier at Target. Well, in order to be a cashier at Target, Bob doesn't bring his own cash register, right? He doesn't bring his own till, his own money. He doesn't bring his own wand. He probably is going to be wearing a name tag that says Target on it. He may actually wear some kind of apron or bib or some other kind of uniform that communicates to everybody, hey, I'm a Target employee. And he has some kind of access code that he punches into the cash register that Target provides. So he's using Target equipment. He is designated to the world and looks like a Target employee. Target directly supervises him if he starts doing crazy things like taking twice as long as everybody else or only wanding every other item. He's going to be counseled. He's going to be critiqued. He's going to be retrained. And of course, Bob is going to be given training at the beginning. So in this case, it seems very, very clear that Bob is in fact an employee. Let's consider the types of situations that might cause somebody to be an independent contractor instead of an employee. Imagine that the Target that Bob works at has had a leaky roof. There's been some rainstorms, maybe even some high winds, and there's been some puddles. And so Target decides to hire a crew to come in and patch the roof where there's been this leakage. The crew is going to be there for 2 days and expects to be there maybe for about 16 hours working. And then that crew is going to leave and go to another business and do some more roofing work. And so this is going to be a very short-term, quote-unquote, employment situation. The roofing crew is going to bring their own ladders, their own supplies, their own shingles, their own staples and nails and things like that. They will train their own workers, all of the roofers, about how to do so safely and all of those good things. So it looks like in that situation that the roofing company and the employees of the roofing company are independent contractors, because Target really isn't going to be up there telling those roofers, hey, you know what, we'd really like for you to roof in this particular way. We'd like for you to do this first and this first and this first. No, Target would be like, hey, you know what's going on. You know how to do that. We don't. We want a good roof at the end of the day. As long as you get us a sound roof with the parameters that we've talked about, by the date that we've talked about, then we're going to be happy. Do what you need to do. So the more control a person retains over the way he or she performs the work, the more likely the courts will find that he or she is an independent contractor. But even when a person is an independent contractor, that person is still in an agency relationship with the person that has hired them. So we still have the agency issue, even though there is a different aspect to the relationship. An independent contractor is not in a master-servant relationship, but you could still say that they are in an agent-principal relationship. So you might still say this is the big concept. Let me just do a big circle. This is the big concept for agent-principal, and we have the situation where we have a master-servant, and we have another situation where we have an independent contractor. There's no overlaps between these two categories, but they are both part of the larger category, agent-principal. So that's just a little bit of an introduction into the idea of agency. It is an important idea. You as the hospitality manager of a hotel, a restaurant, or bar are definitely the agent of your employer. The people you hire to be the bartender, to be the cashier, to be the host or hostess, waiter or waitress, the front desk clerk, all of those individuals are also going to be agents of the employer. And so it's a good thing to think about as you're hiring people. Is this person somebody that I want to be the representative of my employer? So at this point, we've talked about structural organization, organizational structure, I'm sorry. Kind of got the terms turned around in my head. Here we go. So organizational structure, I'm sorry, then we talked about operational structures, and lastly, we talked about the topic of agency. Just going back to this for a second, let's just look at how agency plays out with the 5 different organization operating structures that we have. So when we have the owner-operator structure, the owner-operator is both the agent and the principal at the same time. And so there really is no, because it's the same person, there really is no agent-principal relationship. In a franchise, the franchisee, the company that buys the franchise, is to some extent an agent of the franchisor, and to some extent the franchisor would be an agent of the franchisee. But that's probably not as tight a relationship as some of these other situations. When we have management contracts, the management company is clearly an agent for the owners. Where we have a REIT, the owners of the REIT can't manage the actual REIT itself, so managers have to be hired. Those managers are clearly agents of the owners of the REIT. In a condominium hotel situation, if we have managers who manage the condominium, those individuals would be the agents. If we have a condo hotel owners association, then that association would be the agents for the principals, the owners of the condominium. So we can see that all of these ideas kind of tie together when we look at these 3 concepts. So hopefully this has been helpful to you. If you have any questions about any of the 3 topics that we've covered in Chapter 3, please reach out to me, send me an email message. And again, don't use the Canvas messaging tool. I won't see it. Instead, send it any emails to cgroover. at collin.edu. Or better yet, come and see me during my office hours. You'll find my office hours on the syllabus, and I'll be delighted to talk in more length about the topics that we have in this chapter or any other chapter. Thank you for your attention. I hope you have a great day, and see you for our next lecture. Take care.